Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mind Your Mental. Just a reminder that this podcast is not meant to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health professional. I know they are hard to find, and I get that. I have a bunch of resources on my website if you need them, but I am not your clinician. I am a psychologist, but I am not your psychologist. So if you need any specific help, please look for the help of a licensed mental health professional. Learn all you can learn from the podcast. Enjoy the episode.
So once again, we have Fawn Weaver. I'm going to put the in front of that. You know how like Ohio State, they say the Ohio State. I'm going to say the Fawn Weaver.
Oh, thank you.
On the show, if you don't know about her, you're under a rock. I'm not even going to waste time going over all the bio. Y'all got it ahead of time. Read a book.
Yeah.
It will specifically, wait. You can read this one.
Yes! I'll be so grateful. Pick it up everywhere. Yes.
You know what I'm saying? I'm always telling people to read books anyway. Y'all always see my books behind me. Here you go. And y'all see it was within arm's reach. That's what I'm saying. Like only the ones I actually go back to are in arm's reach. So, just putting that out there.
And so many women are buying it for their men because it says whiskey. I said, y'all, you're going to have to couple the love with the whiskey. This is for women and men equally. Yeah. And it's been amazing to me, though, I will say, about the response from men is that almost every man that has reached into me after having read the book has said they read it in 2 days, something that they had never done with a book before. So there is something I will say in the book that is calling to men, whatever that is, I don't know, that keeps them from being able to put it down till they know the end result of the story.
You know what I think it is? I think you're very much like a do it big kind of person, right? Mm-hmm. When it comes to your rollout, I'm going to be everywhere. I'm signing. We do 24 hours breaking records. When it comes to the rollout, that's the rollout of the book. But let's talk about the whiskey and saying, I want to be in 50 states in 2 years. And everyone being like, not going to happen. But it did. When it came to making sure that you were in the forefront, but because you were always on the plane, like you were at the meetings. Like, it's like, no one's going to say, what is one of the quotes? No one's going to say my brand didn't work because of distributors. Yes. No one's going to say that. Yeah. Right. And I think a lot of like women, of course, we always do it big, but I think men, I think it's the aspect of seeing how big you do it. And I do think that there's this misconception about where you came from, right? Like I think, and you know what it is? I think a lot of times people see individuals who carry themselves well, and they're like, well, let me go look at their CV. I'm sure you got a Harvard in there. I'm sure they started this billion with some $1 million loan. They don't expect to have someone who was given an ultimatum at 15, shape up or ship out. And you said, well, I'm gonna ship out. I'm going to do that. They don't think to get someone who made it a point to, like you mentioned, it's called Covenant House, and you had to go out and you either go to school or you find a job, and you came back one day. Yeah. Or is that not Covenant House? I was remembering you came back one day.
It is Covenant House, and it was the very first day that I was there. That was my third and last homeless shelter was Covenant House. Yeah.
And you said this was one of the moments when you realized you were different because you guys had to look for jobs. You got to go out and look for jobs. And everyone's talking about like, man, this is just so hard. I can't find anything. And how many jobs did you come back with, Fawn Weaver?
4.
Yeah.
And I took 3 of them, by the way.
And you just sitting here like, I don't have these kind of problems. I actually got multiple jobs.
So I literally, at Covenant House, you do this night fire thing. You sit around a campfire, and that's how you connect and you talk. And at least that's what they did then. I recently went to visit the one in Atlanta, and they have a campfire, and I was like, oh, I remember that. I was at the one in Hollywood, California, but still, everybody was lamenting about that, and I didn't have that issue. But here's the thing. I dropped out of high school, but I never stopped reading. So my teacher became books. To this day, when people ask me to be their mentor, I say, you don't need me. Every American Titan, every single one, has written their blueprint before they died, or somebody did it after they died. Pick up a book. And now we really have no excuse with AI. Because AI will just give you the synopsis. Tell me exactly how John D. Rockefeller built his business. Every challenge, every success. What mistakes did he make? And AI takes him 3 seconds to tell you how J.D. Rockefeller did it. I didn't have that benefit. I had to read a whole book on how J.D. Rockefeller did it. But I I am truly self-taught. When I went back to school and graduated, perfect GPA, summa cum laude, University of Alabama, roll tide for anybody that's out there. But the reality is that was 30 years later. And an entire semester, they let me argue for the credits that all of the courses that I would be taking in that semester, I could teach. And I argued and got all 30 credits.
Hey, everyone, just a reminder that Mind Your Mental is not just a podcast. It is also a amazing community, if I do say so myself. It's phenomenal. I mean, you get more access to me. What more could you want in this life? So if you want to join the community, if you're not already on the community, go to my social media. My social media is the same, Raquel Martin, PhD, and DM me the word community so you can get details on joining this amazing flipping community. You get more access to me, y'all. Like, I'm a delight. All right. Hope to see you there.
So what do you think in terms of I have this as a psychologist, and I used to do a significant amount of assessments, and I could look at someone's assessment, like 3 days of testing, and be like, oh, this person's an artist. This person is like, I've always felt that like the geniuses of the world, there's a reason why most of the time they get written off, because you have to think differently. To be an artist, you have to be able to create something out of nothing. To be an entrepreneur, you got to be okay going it alone.
Yes.
Have you found that to be isolating at times? Like, how have you dealt with that as a person? Because in order to go forward, you have to tell a lot of people, they have to look at you crazy a lot and be like, we're doing it.
Yeah.
And they had to be willing to follow and lead. And that can be isolating at times.
As an introvert, I wish people would let me isolate. So to be clear.
So you're fine.
to be clear, I was one of those people coming out of COVID going, no, Zoom is perfect. Why do we have to go back to in-person meetings? We could see each other. We could hug, And so for me, isolation doesn't mean the same thing. And I think that what people, when they're generalizing, they forget that more than 50% of the world are introverts. We're happy to be isolated. Not to say that we don't need to have community. We do, but we choose our community wisely. We choose community that doesn't drain us. And so the people that I've chosen, they give me life. But when it comes to feeling isolated, I've never felt isolated. What I will say is the higher you go, the thinner the oxygen is. And there's less people that know how to breathe in that oxygen. And so you have to be really careful about having conversations when people are second guessing you from a lower oxygen level, because they can breathe and you're having to do the same thing. So it's like when you have Olympians that are marathoners, they will go up into the mountains and train, or they'll wear those masks that pull out some of the oxygen to emulate what it is like to be running in the mountains. The reason why you do that is because if you can do it at that level, then when you're at sea level, you're going to smoke everybody who hasn't learned to be able to run at such a high level. And so that is the place where I don't consider it isolating, again, because I'm an introvert. But what I do recognize is going back and forth with people that don't understand what you're doing makes no sense. All you really have to do is to prove over and over again that in the end, the decision you made, it wasn't understood, but it was right. And once you prove that a number of times, what happens with your team is they look at it and go, I don't know what she's doing, but I trust her because I've seen her do this 10 other times.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. I always tell people I love to travel, but 2 places I'm not going is back and forth with you. Okay. So this is not, it's not going to be a thing. It's not going to be a thing, honey. Like this is, no, it doesn't involve a Centurion lounge. I'm not going, honey. No, thank you. But I totally get that. And I really appreciate you mentioning that as an aspect of like, introverts, because as psychologists, a lot of times I'll see these articles and people will be like, oh, how to be less introverted. And I'm like, it's so interesting the way y'all even frame that, because I've never seen an article that says extroverts. Have you ever thought about ways to make introverts feel more comfortable? It's all in the framing.
Even if you look at all of the offices that popped up before COVID, it were these offices in which people didn't have walls. And they're
Oh
like,
my gosh.
this will make people collaborative. I'm like, yeah, 50% of them. The other 50%, you're going to slow them down because that's not the way we work. So I'm in my home office right now. My distillery, I have an office at the distillery that is 4 times as big as my office at home. And I go to that distillery to there when I have meetings, because otherwise it slows me down every time someone pops in to say hello. For an introvert, that gives energy. For me, when they pop in to say hello and see how things were going, that small talk, it absolutely is draining for me because I'm not wired to small talk. And the beautiful thing is most people who have been with me for a while, they know Fawn's not wired for small talk. Even if you scroll through my social media feed, people are always like, oh my gosh, you're almost always dropping gems. Yes, because I don't waste my voice. I don't waste my breath. If I'm going to say something, it's going to mean something. And so I personally don't understand small talk. And so we are a society that is trying to create extroversion in everybody. And 50% of us, by the way, the majority of the people at the top of the Forbes list are introverts.
You've always been in that realm. I found that like some of my colleagues who do more speaking than they used to, like if we're coming from out of academia, they've actually converted a bit. It's the more that they do these events, the less they're like, yeah, I know I used to go to cocktail parties every week, but I do 3 speaking events a month minimum. I don't even want to leave the house if I'm not doing it for work. Like I've noticed a conversion of people who have to be in a public space so much, who have to be in cameras so much, being like, okay, we'll do this for work. But if I'm not on the clock, don't call me, okay? Like I want to be in my bubble.
But the thing is I'm unapologetic about it. Like I have a really good friends that are up in Nashville. We've been trying to get together forever. And finally I said, listen, the issue is I'm traveling every single day of the week for the most part. When I come home on Saturdays, that's when I'm getting caught up on emails and Slacks and all the things that weren't time sensitive that I didn't get to during the week. So when I get to Sunday and it's the Sabbath, I'm not interested in leaving. I want to be in my PJs, in my robe. So if you'll come to my house and I'm not getting dressed, putting on makeup, and I'm going to be in my pajamas, we can have a blast. And by the way, I am not cooking. I am going to order in. And so what we have to do better as introverts is creating a world that allows us to thrive. Extroverts have done that from the beginning of America. We now need to be better about doing that for ourselves and helping extroverts to understand what brings us joy. We haven't done that well before. And so I do that really, really well. And everybody around me knows I'm an introvert. But that doesn't mean I don't love people. It doesn't mean that I don't love being around people. I absolutely do. The best way I can describe it, though, is I'm essentially a Tesla. When I get to the end of that day, I got to be plugged up or I'm not running the next day. Yeah. It doesn't mean that I don't like to be out and about. It doesn't mean that I'm not an efficient car. It means that I have a time frame in which I can expend energy before it's gone.
Yeah, I very much, for the longest, I've always thrived on like a small set of friends. I'm from the East Coast. We have trust issues, and that's just what it is, right? Really, so like, we really do. Like, it's a thing.
What is it about New Yorkers? It is like
I'm from Philly, but you could be walking somewhere and somebody trying to cozy up to you, and it's because they about to rob you. You see what I'm saying? So you can't be. I'm not like I was very much like what you trying to have a conversation for? What's going on? Did you have a question? I can answer your question, but like you need to take a step back because I feel like you're trying to jack me. It's just very much. I'm married. I'm in Nashville because my husband's from Nashville.
Yeah,
I married a local. Anytime I meet somebody here, they're like, you're not from here, are you? You're super loud. You talk super fast, and you seem like you say pretty much everything. I do. Life's too short. What? Like so it's very a different mindset. But when I've always had a closer circle of friends. When I started going into psychology and doing these events and stuff like that, I'm very good at the events. And my friends are always like, it's so funny, you're good at these events, but you always say you don't like meeting new people. You're a people person, but how? And my thing has always been, I like my people.
Right.
And when you have such a good group around you, I just never seen the purpose of meeting. And I just never saw the purpose of being like, I got 5 really good friends. I don't I think I'm good for the rest of my life. I've never felt a need to add.
Yeah. So I love everybody. I don't really have a my people. I love everybody. I love meeting people. I love being around people that don't look like me, don't think like me, different backgrounds. Like that to me, I absolutely love. But again, I got to then come home and plug in my car.
Yeah.
That's just, so it's not a different vibe, but also I have 5 siblings. And so I've never sought out friendships because that's enough. Like my siblings and I have a great relationship. We love hanging out together. If you ever want to eat a really, really, really good meal, come around these Wilson kids because we eat the whole time. It's like a part of our culture. Like if we are saying, hey, you all want to get together, that is the equivalent of saying, what are we eating? Like that.
Yeah.
But we know that about each other, right? And so we're able to speak a shorthand that doesn't need to be explained. And so that's who I'm usually, if I'm talking to, hanging with, is my family. But even then, we're on text 95% of the time. And that's just, and that works for both my extroverted siblings and my introverted siblings. Although my introverted sibling, there's basically 2 of us and 3 extroverts. And the other introvert, she puts us on mute.
Listen, some people will be like, they'll be like, can I text you? And I'm like, well, let's do a group meet because I can mute that. I like, they update the iPhones, but you didn't used to be able to mute these group messages. And I would just be like, is everything okay?
Yeah.
You sent me 5 messages at 6 a.m. Are you safe? Don't do this. Like, it's just too much.
Listen, my sister Tracy, she muted the group permanently. And so she only pops in when she wants to, because when we start going back and forth about something, it could be funny. Like yesterday, Christy Joy, my little sister, sends, she's got 5 kids and they all basically look like her husband. They'll come out looking like her, but they will switch. So she sends all of 5 of her kids photos with each one with her baby pic next to him. And she says, in case you're wondering what I'm doing this morning, I'm trying to see if any of my kids still look like me. So that chain was back and forth and we're laughing and going, nope, you lost that one. Nope, you lost that one.
You lost it.
Tracy, meanwhile, is like, y'all muted. I ain't seen none of this.
No, I totally get it. I very much get, I call the myself who's just like, oh, there's no point in like engaging with people, my toddler self. And now I'm like, as an adult, grow up, you know, like one of the reasons why my favorite patients used to be angry teens. And I'm just like, oh, cause that was me. Like if you weren't, as someone who read books, I used to be like, this is a boring conversation. So I'm going to go back to my books. I don't enjoy this. And just would just be like, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. But that's very much my toddler self. It's interesting you mentioned social media because I don't know if you know, but one of your clips is going a little viral. The one with Jordan. Yeah, the one with Jordan talking about not believing in imposter syndrome. And I stitched it. And I was like, there's no such thing as imposter syndrome.
Jordan?
I want y'all to understand this.
Morgan DeBond.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Morgan, I'm sorry. Okay, please. When I see you at brunch, do not cuss me out. I am so sorry. Please. She lives in Nashville too, so of course we kick it. But I was like, you know, as a psychologist, I want y'all to understand it doesn't exist. I said I've never met a Black person who's had imposter syndrome. I've never met a Black woman, Black man, Black person.
Yep.
What I have had people have is a justified reaction to an oppressive environment. But how are you going to react to that oppressive environment, right? Like, are you going to be like, oh, they're asking, why are you here? Where else would I be? Where else am I supposed to be?
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be where I'm at. So when people mention like imposter syndrome, I'm just like, well, the way they do that is like, oh, if it's imposter syndrome, I need to work on myself. But if it's a justified reaction to an oppressive oppressive environment, you're like, oh, this isn't a me problem. This is a them problem.
And I need to get out. I don't need to be.
And I need to get out. Get out or burn it down and build my own.
Yeah, but
that's
don't
what you need to do.
A space that you want to be in, that you feel called to be in, that you know is helpful for you to be in, and be uncomfortable in that space. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And that, so many people, remember when WebMD came out and people would just start throwing stuff in there and they'd be diagnosing themselves? That's what I feel like is happening with imposter syndrome. Is it's a syndrome looking for people. And people are finding it because everybody is saying, I really got to work on this imposter syndrome. No, you don't.
It's not a thing.
Yeah.
WebMD they very much will be like, oh, you're going to have you have a stomach ache and it's going to be your last. It's your last stomach ache because I hate to be the one to tell you, girl, but you got an ulcer that's about to erupt. And it's like, wait, what?
I just need some Pepto.
I just need some Pepto. They'd be like, no, this is going to be your last stomach ache of your life. It's the end. Yeah, no, I don't believe in it. And I think the reason why a lot of times a lot of people have been commenting and looking at it just being like, I've never heard a psychologist say they don't believe in a syndrome. I was like, because it's not a syndrome. People don't realize that the research on imposter syndrome as a phenomenon was done by 2 European American psychologists who were researching middle and upper class European American women and why they didn't feel like they belonged in their work environment. Does any of that fit the people that they always try and say have imposter syndrome?
Yeah.
So if the science it wasn't based on us, why are we applying it to us?
Well, and more importantly, it was so limited in scope. And so you're now taking on something that was so limited in scope, period. Not even just in the group of people that it was. I mean, this is not a study that's been vetted. And I just think it's a bunch of nonsense. And so I say it.
Well, yeah, you should. I also thought it was a bunch of nonsense, and I said agreed, because sometimes we forget. One of the things that I gravitated towards with your story and talking about why you decided to look into Uncle Nearest in the first place, I wrote it down because you said if this was another story where it was the fact that we were being taken advantage of or we weren't treated right, I wouldn't have been interested in it.
Not at all.
But that's not what this story was. Can you share more about that?
Absolutely. So the story at the time that I saw it and first read about it was the same time everybody else did. It was cover of the New York Times International. Here in the U.S., it was on the cover of the New York Times food section. And the headline was Jack Daniels embraces a secret ingredient, help from a slave. And you had this photo of Jack Daniel, which all of us know what he looks like. Whether or not we drink Jack, we know what he looks like. People around the world knows what he looks like. So the question was, who's this African American to his immediate right? How did that person get such a prominent position in the only known photo that Jack has ever taken with other people? And so for whatever reason, we as a culture, really it started on Black Twitter, very quickly determined, and when I say within hours, I mean hours, very quickly determined without any research done whatsoever that Jack Daniel was a slave owner. He stole the recipe, he hid the slave. And I saw it and thought, this photo was either taken in the 19th century or the top of the 20th century. If a famous white man, which he was already at that time, not famous around the world like he is now, but certainly where he was located, if a famous white man chose to put an African American man to his immediate right, he was not trying to erase that person. He was making a statement. So I wanted to know what that statement was. And began diving into it. And the more I learned, the more I was convinced that Jack Daniel was quite possibly the first business ally that we know of.
Yeah, especially since you mentioned you got the full photo, and when you zoom out, what's the difference in the full photo versus the one that most people see?
Is it seated the center position of the entire photograph to the African American? Jack is off center. The center of the photo is George Green, Nearest Green's son.
Exactly. Like it's the framing of it, right? Because just simply by cropping it, it's like, oh, it's to their right. You zoom out, it's like, no, actually, dead center.
Dead center.
Where do we put the most important piece? If we're taking a picture with grandmom or great grandmom that we want to keep forever at Thanksgiving, where do we make sure they are? They're in the dead center. Because every time.
Yeah. So what it said to me was Jack wasn't trying to hide him. He was trying to make sure America would never be able to erase him. And so then my question became, if Jack didn't want him erased, that means he was very significant. So I want to know the significance. That's what drew me into the story.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. I also appreciate when you mentioned like the aspect of erasure, it brought me back to one of your, as you can see, when I want to learn about people, I not only read the things that they've written, which I really always appreciate when y'all write your own books, because when you write your book, so I can just be like, okay, I'm gonna start with the book. Yeah. So before I ask for a guest, I'm gonna start with the book. But also like the interviews is you go into detail about so many different aspects. But when you mentioned erasure, it brought me back to one of your interviews and the topic you were talking about charcoal.
Yeah.
and the process when it comes to whiskey and the filtering process. But then you also brought it back to there's a cycle when I think of charcoal, I also think about my suicide attempts.
Yeah.
And you mentioned because they also had to use charcoal, I think you said in your second attempt.
Yeah.
And I was just like, the way you framed that, like the fact that you mentioned this as being a mission, the fact that you state that the reason why this is amazing and what's your secret ingredient, you always say God, but your ability to kind of like put this cycle of just being like, when I think of the charcoal, I not only think about it in terms of we need this to make the whiskey, but I also think about the aspect of like, when I realized that I had a purpose on being on this earth.
Yeah.
And that was during this second attempt.
Absolutely. Well, what was being filtered out of my stomach, what was used to filter out the impurities in my stomach, is the same thing that we use to filter out the impurities in whiskey. So that's why people will be sitting on and sipping on Uncle Nearest all night and wake up the next morning and not have a headache. Is because we've removed those things that would give a person a headache. Now you add sugar to it, you add carbonation to it, all bets are off. But if you're just sipping on Uncle Nearest and you're not going overboard to a place where you're dehydrating yourself, it has no impact in that regard. And that's the reason why. And so I will say this is the beauty about having a really, really great editor of a book, is she's actually a person who pulled that out. I never put the two and two together. And I remember going back and reading it for edits and going, oh, that's profound. But I'm not the one who made that connection. She did.
It is amazing because you stated that like you decided if this can't take me out, nobody can. I'm meant to be here.
Nobody.
For a
and
reason.
Right now, I mean, what I'm doing, like, right. I thought you were talking. I've had a few things go viral in the last few weeks, and one of them is this tequila takedown I'm doing, because most of the tequilas we drink in America, people think it's clean. They think that, their 1942 is top tier, which is what I thought, or their Clase Azul is top tier. So it's had all of the fat, the sugar, the carbs, all that stuff distilled out, which is what is supposed to happen. And most of us don't realize when we're buying something that says 100% Blue Weber agave, that for many of the most popular brands, yes, they distilled out the sugar, but then on the other side of it, they went back in and put agave back in. Like the same stuff we buy from Whole Foods, it's sugar. And I don't have an issue with it if I knew that's what I was consuming. And so I did, tequila takedown, 3 parts. The third part is going up as soon as you and I get off of this. But the first 2 went viral. And I mean, folks in the agave community, mad. And I said, y'all, you can't become the number 1 spirit in America and not tell us that we're consuming something with additives and sugar. It's cool if we choose that. But we should have the option. We should know what we're consuming. So there, in that regard, all of a sudden everybody around me is like scared because of the cartel and how, much involvement there is there, and the Mexican tequila government and how strong-armed they are. And this goes back to my thing. I said, listen, if they want to get to me, they're going to have to go through guns in Alabama, guns in Tennessee, sharpshooters on my own property. And if they can go through all 3, they still got to get through God to get to me. And that's just my mentality. So everybody was really afraid when I started this series that physical harm could come to me. And I was like, you can't hurt me without going through God. And I don't know that I would have that level of strength without having tried to take myself out twice and been like, oh crap, God is not even letting me take me out. So he certainly isn't going to let somebody else take me out.
Do you think that mindset is necessary in the decision to become an entrepreneur anyway? Because one of the clips I saw you share was just the fact that like, don't go into entrepreneurship without a strong SWOT analysis. If you don't look at this business plan and want to talk yourself out 5 times, don't do it.
Yep. And it's absolutely accurate, because I don't care how amazing the business is that you want to go into, you are going to run into so many surprises, so many challenges that can knock you off your game, that can end your company if you don't keep going. And for us as Black women, we are the number 1 group starting businesses, but we're also the number 1 group failing at business. And a part of that is not having the business plans with the SWOT analysis, just jumping in and going, I have a good idea, I'm going to go for it, and not doing the planning. Another part of that is that if your life has shown that you're the quitting kind, entrepreneurialism is not for you, because there are going to be so many things on a daily basis that are going to cause you to want to quit. So unless you have that in your body to not quit bone, if you don't have a not quit bone, you need to work for somebody else.
I also think there's that the thought process of like, I want this to be my legacy. Like, I want my name to be out there. And you mentioned that if nobody remembers Fawn Weaver in 2-3 decades, I don't care
at all. So, one of the things I've discovered is a lot of people make really bad decisions because they're living for their obituary. They're living for what people will say when they're gone. And instead, and by the way, it speeds up their timeline. Instead of just saying, you know what, however the Lord opens the doors, whatever he decides is for me. This amazing pathway that he's created for me, I'm going to make the decision to choose the direction that he wants to go in. What ends up happening is if you're living for your legacy, you shortchange that because you don't know how long that's going to take. And so then you start forcing things. And for me, I literally, when I'm gone, I do not care if the name Fawn Weaver is remembered at all. And there's an enormous freedom to that I have found a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people in this oxygen level, they don't have. I was literally just speaking to a group there were about 100 people, and I go and I'm paid to speak to people all over this country and, well, really all over the world. But this particular group, 100 people, $160 billion in that room. And the question they had for me was, how do they find purpose?
Because that's what you lead with. That's like the underlying thing of all your interviews and all of your stories is like, oh, this is what I was called to do.
You are your purpose. Everything you do in every season, when you are aligned with what you were called to do in that season, you're in your purpose because you are your purpose. The challenge, and you see it all the time, and it's probably a lot harder for you because you got to peel back all these layers. But most people in life show up as representatives of themselves.
Masking.
You can't be a rep for yourself and be in your purpose. Your purpose is attached to you personally, authentically. You literally cannot be in your purpose and be a rep of yourself. And so I always try to get people, if you do nothing else, peel back to being who you were created to be authentically, because that is your purpose. And then being in every season, being where you're supposed to be and doing what you're supposed to do in that season. And how do you know what that thing is that you're supposed to do? That thing will come knocking on your door if you are you, if you are authentic, and it will connect with for me, I always tell people, I'm Fawn, 7 years old, realized that child who refused to read nonfiction books because all she wanted to read was every page of the Encyclopedia Britannica. That is me to this day. You are not going to get me riled up on social media about something you didn't do research on. Everybody is up in arms. They mad. And I'm going to go and do my own research and decide to bypass that conversation altogether. Why? Because that 7-year-old Fawn, she got a whole thing of Encyclopedia Britannica. Remember, at that time, I'm almost 50 years old. So at that time, the encyclopedia people were coming door to door to selling them. Oh,
as a set.
And if you remember the letters, there was so much, they'd be split into two. So it'd be like SM through, SN through Z type of thing. And so I would get lost in Encyclopedia Britannica. And I only wanted to spend my time on things that were nonfiction. I believe that has greatly benefited me in my life.
Do you think that authenticity is more difficult for individuals in the Black population who have to deal with this realm of like respectability politics? Because your story about how you're sharing about how you had to answer the phone, it's a beautiful day at the Wilson residence.
Well, that was when I was a kid and I didn't do that very long.
Yeah. And you didn't do that very long. And you mentioned the fact that the first thing you said was, what if it wasn't a beautiful day?
Yeah. And
why do I have to say this?
I wouldn't answer the phone. And so mom and dad would be like, Fawn, pick up the phone. No, because it's not a beautiful day. And you want me to pick up the phone and say it's a beautiful day at the Wilson household. And so that, I do believe that me leaving home at 15 was my greatest blessing. I believe that to this day, because around the time that people would have been so focused on molding me, I moved into an environment where people did not care about molding me. They didn't care about me enough to think about molding me. And that was when I moved to the hood, where, like, the parents are not trying to hoard over their kids and all the rest of that stuff. And so for me, I left a beautiful, huge home in Pasadena, California, and moved to Jordan Downs and Watts. And I felt so great with them roaches and my food stamps, where I could buy honey buns every day, microwave them for 20 seconds, and it tasted like a cinnamon roll. Like, that felt comfortable to me. Why? Because I was insistent on being me.
Something that's not realized when it comes to the Black community a lot, right? Like, when you mention how do you find purpose, and a lot of people, they're bringing up representation of themselves, that's masking. The whole, say it's a good day even if it's not a good day. That's because Black people are taught respectability politics. It doesn't matter how you feel, and we need to put off this image of yourself. And one of the things that you mentioned a lot, your freeing grace, is just being like, this is how I'm going to be.
This is who I am.
This is who I am.
Place of love. I come from a place of grace. And so my words reflect that. But make no mistake about it, you're going to know how I feel. You're going to know what I think. You're going to know what I believe. And that's a choice that I made very early on, and I've never wavered in that.
What tips do you have for individuals who look like us, who feel as though that's going to cost them their job? If I act the way that I want to act, and I actually share things, and I critically think, and I ask questions, which are all aspects of higher learning, guys. One of the reasons why I say my kids can go toe to toe with me is, if you're asking a question, that's not being disrespectful. That's not talking back. You should ask questions. If you can't ask questions of me, how are you going to ask questions of the world when they do stupid stuff? We've always done it this way. How are you going to build? What kind of messaging would you say to these people? Like, well, I'm going to lose my job if I do that. I can't just, like, that's disrespectful.
Work toward a company that embraces that. There are plenty of companies at this point in America. It's what I love about Gen Zennials. They're like, we're not going to be fake for you. And like we're not. And if you try to force it, guess what? We're not showing up for work.
I'm quitting. Yes.
Like, look. And I'm going to quit on social. Like, yes. I'm not even going to come to you. You're going to learn on my feed that I quit. And so I do think that this prior generation that boxed people in are not going to do well with their companies if they continue to. So you might as well spend the time, instead of being frustrated, do your work, it's paying your bills, but also be looking for the cultures and the communities that embrace you as you are. There's an African-American guy who works for me in a market that is majority African-American, but there is still a very large, wealthy white population. And I would watch him shapeshift. And I literally had to sit him down and I said, don't do that. And he's like, yeah, but they won't understand me. Yes, they will. Show up as you at all times. And if anybody has an issue with that, keep it moving. And I remember him saying to me, because he likes to call me boss lady. And I remember him saying to me, boss lady, this isn't anything I've ever heard in my career. It's going to take me a second to be able to do this. I said, I'm okay with that, but I need you to show up as you. And then when I'm always with my team members, their families. And so when his wife was around, I was like, did he tell you I told him he needs to stop being somebody who he's not and show up as who he is? He's an educated Black man with a master's degree from Morehouse. Show up exactly who you are with your culture, with your background. Allow people to learn from you. But if you're shape-shifting into who they are or who they expect you to be, they can never learn from you. And the way that we are going to grow more in this country, in this society, is we have to get people, they don't have to respect us. I don't care if you respect me. But I do want you to actually understand who I am. And I can't do that if I won't show you who I am.
And it also takes too much energy. One of the things my husband says a lot is I underestimate other people's processing speed when it comes to like doing things. I was like, well, I think fast and I talk fast. And my friend, she mentioned, she was like, well, you don't really spend a lot of energy with masking. And I don't think y'all realize, like, creating these avatars of yourselves, that's taking energy.
Absolutely.
It's taking energy from your brain. You're wondering why you can't complete this task. You more so concerned about, like, making sure your hair looks appropriate or making sure you're standing a certain way or making sure you look the way that they want you to, where you could actually be critically thinking a solution that will fix the issue that they complained about in the first place. I don't spend a lot of time masking. I'm just like, oh, we're going to problem solve. We're going to critically think, because my energy always goes directly to that. People who think that it's really going to help you grow in your environment, you don't even realize your potential because you're capping it, because you're spending so much mental energy.
Yep.
Saying, how am I going to, okay, so this is how I think about the solution in my brain, but how do I put it into my translator to make it come out the way I think they're going to receive it? Yep. You put a cap on everything when you do that. I'm able to process fast because I really am just like, oh, this is what came into my head. This is how I process it. This is how I'm going to walk through it.
Right. And I'm able to problem solve a lot faster than most people for the same reason.
Because where's my? I'm not going to translate it. I'm going to be like, you understood what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's go with it.
Yeah. And this whole new thing of people saying, so I hear what you're saying is, and then they repeat back to you everything. I was like, who taught that? Come on, y'all. Who taught that? Why? Why do we just teach people to waste time?
Yeah.
So yes, I do think that over the years we've gotten information that isn't the best for us. And if we just focus on being authentically us, but the key though is coming from a kind place, coming from a place of kindness, from a place of love, pull every fruit of the Spirit in Galatians, coming from those places, then your words, even if they hurt someone, that's not your problem.
And I think it's the best thing, because when you mention coming from Galatians, I really like the fact that you say some people will have a problem with you saying, I drink whiskey every day and I'm also a God-fearing woman and God is at the backbone of this. And they're like, well, the Bible says not drinking. No, the Bible talks about drunkenness.
Exactly. I don't go toe to toe with me on the Bible.
I want to see you go toe to toe with a pastor. I know, that's what I'm saying.
I do. I keep asking them to invite me. Nobody will invite me on their shows. None of the pastors want me to come on. I'm like
show me the passage. I just want to see it. I just want to see it, because
just one
educate me, please.
Yeah. You don't even have to show me multiples. Give me one.
Give me one where it's talking about drinking instead of drunkenness. Those are not the same thing.
Yeah. And then explain to me why God chose the first miracle that he chose for Jesus. That wasn't just that his mother asked him to make wine for this wedding. That's the way that we sell it in the church. No, his mother insisted that he make wine for a wedding that had run out of the wine. And in Galilee, during that period of time, running out of wine was such an embarrassment because you'd have so much of it. And so you never run out of wine at that time in Galilee. So that means that those people had to have been drinking so much in order to run. So she wasn't asking them to make wine for a party that was dry, that people were sober. She's asking them to make wine for people. And how do we know this? Because the bridegroom comes to Jesus, or comes to the actual group, and says most of these weddings, the people put out the good stuff first. But you waited until everybody had been drinking to put out the good stuff. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Let's rewind on this. So yes, show me your scripture, which doesn't exist, but can we just sit here for a second?
My mom, anytime, because my dad, he drinks beers at times, but he'll talk about my mom when she drinks wine, and she'll be like, Jesus turned water into wine. My mom is a God-fearing woman, She said, Jesus turned water into wine.
He absolutely did. And tell her to add the line for people who had been drinking for 3 days.
Listen, the one thing you're not about to out-scripture her every time. She just okay. It's not happening.
I'm the same way. I don't go to bed without having read the Bible that day, some portion of it. And so, no, don't do that. Like I did an interview with someone recently, and they were talking about the fact that women want love and men want respect. And I said, oh yeah, so that ain't biblical. And I said,
listen.
So
let me, because listen, we coming towards time, so let me not get into the mental implications of the patriarchal thought process of being like, we don't want respect to, because a lot of times when I talk about Black love and they're like, well, you got to love the Black community. My Black love is also accountability. So don't expect me to just blow smoke up your behind. I could be a psychologist and also be like, no, that was wholeheartedly your fault. Well, and my Black love is accountability.
It's also why I was speaking to the Chief Network yesterday in DC, or 2 days ago, whenever I was there. And the person who was asking me the question said, yeah, I've heard you say, because people always say, I'm not playing checkers, I'm playing chess. But you tell people you're not playing chess, you're playing Go. And so I explained to this audience of women how patriarchal the game of chess is. The game of chess, the nature is every piece on the board is sacrificed to protect the king, including the queen. So we grow up thinking the game that we are supposed to be mastering is the game that protects the king at our expense. I don't play chess. I play Go. That's about expanding territory. And so we have to even change and question the things that we did when we were younger that we thought was helping us to become more strategic. Because then when the queen is sitting across negotiating with the king, what is her instinct to do? Protect the king. Why? Because we learned how to play chess.
I love that. Well, I want to end on one thing, because I don't think that and let me make sure my information is correct. The spirits industry as a whole was based in, like, a lot of it was backed with illegalities, right? Like the mafia, right? Like in terms of
during Prohibition. So
during Prohibition, right?
Yeah.
And so there's very much still residue of that.
Listen, the only reason I believe God chose me for this industry is, as my husband would say, Fawn, you got hood tendencies. And I literally had conversations with people, and I go, you don't want to go toe to toe with me in the boardroom. Why? Because I got hood tendencies.
I love that. Okay, and that's why it's so important. Like, because when you mentioned the tequila aspect and you walking into these rooms, I think people see it as just a business, but it's not just a business.
No.
There's very much residue about how this system had been run during Prohibition, and there's still aspects of that. Can you share with everyone why tequila is, why you're doing this, why the aspect of thinking of tequila and that takedown is so important to your brand? Like, is there anything happening with tequila that, like, why this has come up for you?
I'm not starting a tequila brand. I have no desire. And I tell people that the reason I have no desire is that I don't believe if you don't own the land, I don't believe you own the brand. I believe.
Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to talk about. Okay, can you talk about that?
I tell people, until you see me walking the grounds of Jalisco and buying agave, which is impossible to do, is to go into there, and maybe down the road that may be the case where I could go in there and buy a distillery and buy. But until that happens, which I don't see that happening in the next decade or so, until that happens, you're not seeing a tequila coming from me. The tequila takedown was very simple. I had been drinking Don Julio 1942 and Clase Azul for years, thinking that what I was having was as pure as the bourbon I make, was as pure as Uncle Nearest. And then I learned recently that not only were they adding agave and glycerin and all the rest of this stuff, which takes it from being what Uncle Nearest is, fat-free, gluten-free, sugar-free, carb-free, that's what in its purest state, that's what tequila is, that's what vodka is, that's what bourbon is. And so I learned that not only was I not drinking pure tequila, but even more importantly is their governing body had recently told all additive-free tequilas they weren't allowed to say they were additive-free. So they're protecting the big guys, the Don Julio 1942s of the world, and they're protecting them at the expense of the little guys, because the little guys, the only differentiator that they've ever had to promote their product is we're additive free. Now the governing body has said, if you even claim to be additive free, we will fine you till next year. And so I was like, oh, y'all are trying to take down the little guy? You can't touch me. So yeah, how about I'm about to showcase all of the additive free. So my takedown wasn't of tequila as the industry. It was a big tequila that has been lying and saying that tequila was more pure than bourbon.
Okay, so I want to actually end on the own the land, own the brand thing, because you also you got the land first of all.
Yes.
And there's so much serendipity.
I got the trademarks first. and the
yes.
and the online real estate first. Because if you don't have the online real estate, the URLs, the social media handles, you don't own the brand.
Yeah, and there's so much serendipity on the fact that like being shown the land
Yep.
where you bought everything in terms of the person, who was it, the realtor saying, you know, if you ever decide to do something with this, I will come out of retirement.
Yep.
To help you, to make sure you get it right, because they were the descendant of Jack Daniels.
Yeah. Like
you can't make that up. But you mentioned own the land, own the brand is something that a lot of companies, Black-owned companies that are struggling with the liquor business, like it's because you own your land. Like no matter what, it's always going to start there. Can you see in any of
it's not even just the liquor business. Like there's a really popular, well, I guess, you know, this is across the board, but you see it all the times with restaurants. You'll have a restaurant that has been popular growing for a decade, 2 decades, and all of a sudden they're closing. Why? Because their landlord decided not to renew their lease. So you just spent a full generation building a business that you are now closing. But meanwhile, that entire time that you've been renting from that landlord, you've been increasing the value of their property. That's what I mean by that.
That's my question. How would you apply that to other individuals and entrepreneurs to understand that you attribute your success for so many things, but you always say, just like you mentioned, I'm not going into tequila until I can own the land.
Yeah.
How can people think about that as a way to either keep going or stop until you can own the land? Like, what does that look like in other businesses?
It may just be digital. So for instance, people that are building their businesses on YouTube, let's take, what's the gal's name? Candace Owen? Is it Candace Owen? Really? She's like a firebrand. Like people love her, hate her. African American.
Oh yeah. And she's in Tennessee now too. Yeah.
Is she really?
Yeah, I don't know if she still has the show, but she was in Tennessee for a minute.
I didn't know that. So, she does have a show. But recently, where she makes all this money on her YouTube videos, and YouTube decided to demonetize her platform. So now she can't make any money there. This is what it means by this. If your entire business is set up where you're having to go through something you don't own the brand. So if YouTube can take it, if YouTube goes down and it takes your business, you don't own it. If Instagram goes down and it takes your business, you didn't own it. And so the online real estate is at the very least making sure that is where people can find you. So if Instagram, I'm on Instagram every day, so much stuff. But if my account on Instagram goes down, Uncle Nearest isn't going to lose business, because I'm going to be in the press every single day talking about why Instagram took me down, and my URL, unclenearest.com, is where I'm going to be sending people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean by you got to own the land. Whether it's online real estate or physical real estate, whatever it is, that if somebody else makes a decision to stop allowing you to do something through their platform, and you can no longer do business, you didn't own it to begin with.
Yeah, social media is renting your audience. You need an email list. You need to purchase your URLs. If they don't allow you to do it on Instagram, be like, okay, but y'all know where my website is, right? I'll be streaming live from the website from now on, because you're not about to take this from me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Fawn. We have so many amazing tidbits. I really wanted to focus on not only the entrepreneurship, but the fact that like you work in your purpose. I tell so many people, like, it's not about a job, because my purpose is to increase the Black mental wealth of the Black community. But I can do that as a psychologist. I can do that as a speaker. I can do that as an author. When you align yourself with a purpose, no matter what, you make sure your purpose is driving what you're doing. And so many people are getting like, oh, I want this job. Okay. What happens if you lose that job? Does that mean you have no purpose?
Well, but this goes back to my belief that I don't believe purpose has anything to do with what you do. Purpose is who you are. And everything that you do is because you recognize who you are. So the purpose is you.
The purpose is you. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, everyone. Remember to be kind to yourself. 2 steps forward and 1 step back is still 1 step forward. That is just math. And have a good rest of your day.